Hey, how's everybody doing? This is Luke Marino, Life Cycles Live. Got an awesome episode this week because it's a little bit of a surprise episode. Tom is my savior this week. I had Cliff Williams lined up to join me, and Cliff had a proactive maintenance event happen at his house. So he's unable to join me today. And Tom stepped in as a good shipmate because today is Coast Guard Day. And
Woohoo!
he said, I got your back there, shipmate. I said, Roger that, sir. Thank you very much. And so he's wearing his Connie shirt. That's the confidence. And Tom, I'm just grateful that you were able to make it today. Thanks for filling in for me.
Oh, not at all. I'm little sorry that Cliff couldn't make it because Cliff is awesome. I've known Cliff for many, many years, and every time I'm at a conference with him, I always clear my schedule to make sure I'm at his presentations because he's just a riot. He's a great guy, very knowledgeable.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like I wasn't planning to get you on here anyways. I have you on my list. I just didn't have enough of a motivator to reach out to you yet, and
Yeah.
I've been wanting to find out more about your book and what you've got going on the last year because I think the last time you and I saw each other was at SMRP, and I think it might have been Phoenix. If it wasn't the
Uh,
symposium in Phoenix, it was
Memphis,
um,
maybe.
yeah. So I think it was like
Yeah.
2018 or 19.
Yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah, and I think it was me, you, and Hank Kosovar hanging out. And
Yeah, that's trouble.
yeah, yeah, and I think actually we ended up at dinner with Bob Latino, and that's always a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. I see
Um,
your dad just checked in. Happy Coast Guard Day, Charles. Chuck.
yeah, there we go. Yeah, so as people, if people join the chat, you guys type something, I can throw it up on the screen. So this is Pops, and he and Tom are old shipmates. They go back, so this is really cool.
Yeah.
You know?
Charlie was an outstanding coastie.
Yes, yes. He made my entry to the Coast Guard very interesting.
Oh, I bet.
I mean,
Oh,
it literally started day one. You're on the bus into Cape May, and the doors open, and the company commander gets on, and he's this little thawed off, like 5'2" tall, but he's like 5'2" wide,
yeah.
and his name was Chief Lucky, and he just starts screaming at everybody. I've never seen this guy in my life, and you know, we get
Somehow he got the word though, didn't he?
we got separated from I got separated from the rest of the group, and because I was married, and he comes over to me and he says, "Is your last name Marino?" And I didn't know how to respond. I was like, "Yes, sir." And
Oh, ooh.
he just starts drilling me. And so I get out of boot camp, and later on, I told my dad. He's like, "So how was it?" I said, "Oh, it was great." I said, "Man, this guy Chief Lucky was intense," and he just starts laughing. He's like, "I know him." So it was like minute one.
Yeah.
Uh, and then, I felt bad for my brother because when my brother joined, I was an MK1, and my dad was still active. And so that kid just got it from everywhere.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, he got it from everywhere.
Oh,
So,
my son went in for 4 years, and he got out about a year and a half, 2 years ago now. But yeah, it wasn't so hard for him because I had retired in '03. So very few people were still in when I retired that
oh, that's a good thing.
that knew him that were able to give him any grief. So
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good thing for him in some ways. But at the same time, you kind of, miss out on those kinds of events in his, career. You don't get to live them, but they sure are fun knowing when you go to bed at night that your kid's being harassed.
yeah. Oh yeah. Puts a smile on your face. It's a good thing.
Yeah. And so what year did you join the Coast Guard, Tom?
I joined in 1979. Um,
Awesome.
I was kind of an odd duck. I went to boot camp after my junior year of high school,
Oh, wow.
um, and there was actually a program at the time called the RK program, and it allowed you once you're 17 years old, you could go to boot camp. And so I went to boot camp during the summer after my junior year of high school, and I
Wow.
went back to high school, finished high school, and during my senior year, one weekend a month, I was going out either to Boston or Point Allerton or Scituate or Woods Hole, someplace doing reserve duty.
Hmm.
And then the following summer, 1980, I went to MK school. in Yorktown, and got my people don't know what that is. It's basically getting your trade for military service. So I was a machinery technician, and did that for about 9 years, and then I got selected for officer candidate school, and finished out my career as an officer.
Wow. That's almost with the exception of your with the exception of your entrance, it's almost verbatim exactly my timing. I was 9 years enlisted when I went to officer candidate school. And so as an officer, you went straight into a student engineer ride?
Yeah, sure did. Student engineer DCA, and then from there they sent me to college for 2 years under the Naval Engineering Technology program to make me smart. And then from there, I went to the Coast Guard Cutter Confidence as a chief engineer.
Wow.
And then on to some other shoreside support,
Sure.
jobs. So, yeah, kind of an interesting thing. A lot of people probably don't know about the Coast Guard, that its founding in 1790, it was the Revenue Cutter Service, and that was the way that the new United States was able to start collecting tax money to start paying back our war debt to France.
Wow.
So a lot of people don't know how far back we go, or what the origins of the Coast Guard were, but that was pretty significant.
Yeah, and I work with the Navy now, and it's amazing to me how much, maybe it's a submarine community thing, but they love the Coast Guard. Every time I am introduced to new guys in our work and everything, and they're like, "Oh, you prior Navy?" I'm like, "No, I was in the Coast Guard." And they're like, "Oh, that's awesome!" Like they immediately light up. And I tell them that's the opposite response we have in the Coast Guard when we say, "Are you prior service?" And they say, "Yeah, I was in the Navy." We go, "Oh, sorry to hear that."
Yeah. Well, just to we'll keep this clean, but all the inter-service rivalry kind of stuff. It was really interesting to me that one time when we were going through refresher training, and back in like the 1980s up through probably the mid 90s, we used to go through refresher training. Cutters on the East Coast would go to Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay, and there was a fleet training group there. And so a lot of times you'd have Navy ship riders, and they're running you through all these various drills and doing all this stuff. And I remember distinctly one day we had this damage control chief Navy that was on board, and we're going through some stuff, looking at our paperwork and all this kind of stuff. And then they make the pipe for Reveille for the midwatch. And so he looks at me, he says, "Reveille for the midwatch? What the hell is that?" I said, "Well, in the Coast Guard, if you're up all night on the midwatch, they'll just sleep in until 10. What? I think right then and there he wanted to lateral into the Coast Guard. So
yeah, it's a totally different game. And I'm blessed to be able to work with the Navy guys now, and I've worked with the Army for a year before this, and having spent all that time in the Coast Guard, it's just been great to experience the different ways the services do business. And the Navy is so big, compared to what the Coast Guard is, and it's been very rewarding getting that kind of rounded perspective. Although I do have to kind of smile sometimes in meetings because we'll be talking about all these different resource issues, and I'm like, yeah, those aren't problems. Those are really good situations to be in. But it's a different world. It's just totally different.
Yeah, well, I remember years ago when I was at MLC, which is the Surface Forces Logistics Command now, but same building, same offices and everything. Steve Baum was a commander that he was actually my boss for a period of time, and he retired and he went to work for the Army Corps of Engineers. And so he calls me up one day and we're chatting, and he says, "Remember when I used to look out the window into the harbor and we'd see the Navy ships go by, and I used to say, I wish we had their budget?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, now with the Army Corps, I see a Coast Guard cutter go by, and I said, I wish I had their money."
Yeah, he's going in the wrong direction.
Yeah. But that's I mean, when maintenance and reliability in the Coast Guard, we have very meager budgets, and you try to do things, and most of the time when you and I were in, the platforms were very old.
Yeah.
Couldn't find spare parts, and expertise on old systems was dwindling. So even if you wanted a tech rep, they were hard to find.
Yeah.
But my early days, you didn't want tech reps. You wanted to do the work yourself. It was an insult to call in a tech rep. So that was an old time.
What a culture change, though. It's like, um, that pride led to some really good behavior, and it also led to some bad behavior. And I remember looking at the good stuff, like, wow, we actually were like motivated to tackle things and learn and explore new equipment and methods and everything, and get better at being able to brag about how good an MK you were. But when when I became a port engineer, I started to see some of the downside to it as well, where people were afraid to issue CAS reps because they didn't want people to know that their stuff was broken and they needed help. And I'm
Right.
like,
Which to me, that was really ridiculous. I
yeah,
would,
it's nuts.
yeah, yeah. That's the exact wrong way to do it. You have to document what your problems are,
Yeah,
because it may not
absolutely.
help. It may not be helpful for you in that moment, but you're collecting data. You're able, and when you have a fleet of the same types of assets, that goes
Mhm.
into a master database, and everybody gets to use that data downstream.
That's
So
right.
it's a really, really important thing. And so you got to put your ego aside sometimes, right?
That's
So,
right. Oh, look, we've got Mohammed on now. Now Mohammed's reaching out to say hi, Tom. Mohammed
hey,
is by far our most consistent watcher. He's here every single week.
is that right? Well, welcome,
Yes,
Mohammed.
sir.
Nice to have
And,
you.
and Mohammed's in West Africa.
Ah, okay.
Yep. And he works in
So,
mining.
okay. And so it must be middle of the night for him there then, right? Several hours
Probably
away.
8 o'clock. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think last time he tuned in, we're consistent at 4 to 5 block every Wednesday, and I think he was at 8 o'clock at that point.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
yeah, welcome, Mohammed. Always great to have you, and don't be afraid to ask Tom questions as we progress, because Tom's journey out of the military has been pretty phenomenal as well, and that's one of the things I really wanted to talk about. I mean, we've had, we could go on sea stories and talk about Coast Guard stuff all day, but I think it's been, when I was getting ready to leave the service and I was looking at staying, or getting into, I should say, the maintenance and reliability community on the external to the DHS or DoD side. I was, talking to my dad, and I said, hey, who do you know that I should probably follow or talk to or whatever? And the two names that came up right away were you and Hank.
Yep.
And I was fortunate to work with Hank on a project during that time period. So that was great. But, tell me a little bit about what your transition from the military to the civilian sector was like and what you initially did.
Yeah. So it was 2003 in May when I retired. And the first act that I did after I retired was to take a jump in my truck, and I drove from Chesapeake, Virginia to Knoxville, Tennessee, to take my CMRP exam.
Oh,
And
you had to drive to
that was
Knoxville for
actually
this?
yeah, it was at Knoxville, because there used to be a different management company that was the group that took care of SMRP. And so I drove out to their offices, and that was, I tell you, after 24 years in the service and just completing an XO tour, that was the most therapeutic drive I've taken in my life. I had no responsibilities, and I was still getting paid because I had like 90 days of leave time or some ungodly thing. So I was still getting paid. I jumped in my truck. I drove out there, got out there the night before, had a nice steak dinner, went in, took the test the next day, and took my time driving back. It was just awesome. Because what had happened was the fall before I retired, it was 2002, and SMRP's annual conference was in Nashville.
Mm.
And so I went there, paid my own way, just to go there and see what that community was like. I had done a bunch of presentations at like ASNI and SNAMI, things like that, talking about maintenance and condition monitoring and things like that. But I was not involved so much with the private industry stuff. So I figured, hey, here's a group. I'm going to go out and check this out and see what it is. Well, happenstance, I was on an elevator going down to the expo hall, and I'm standing next to this gentleman and talking with him. Turned out he was the president of a consulting firm, a fairly small one, about 20 people. And so I chatted with him. He brought me. They had a booth, so I went over to the booth, talked with them, and they said, "Hey, we'd love to have you, try out this consulting thing." So I said, "Okay," and we kept in touch after the conference. And about well, actually, I know exactly when it was. It was unfortunately, it's a memory that is hard to forget. It was when the second space shuttle broke up. That Sunday, I was on my way. I was in the airport headed to Seattle to go to a Tesoro refinery up in Anacortes to do 2 weeks with this consulting firm to check it out. They're paying me for it and all that. So I took 2 weeks of leave, went out there and did a little consulting gig. Loved it. Then I came back, did a couple more months in the Coast Guard, and then retired. They made me a job offer. I started working for them, and I worked for them for about a year. Then decided to just go out and hang out my own shingle and do my own thing. The great thing about being retired from the military is you have health care and you have a little bit of a retirement check that comes in, so you're always going to have a roof and food, and you got your health care covered, so it gives you a lot more flexibility to be able to do things like that. So I started doing consulting work. At first I was doing 1099 work for others, and then I started selling some of my own jobs. And then I started selling jobs and bringing in 1099 people. And then I got to the point where I had hired several people. And now I'm kind of on the other side of that bell curve. I've divested myself of any employees. And I had done some quite large projects up to $2 million, and everything in between from, a $2,500 thing to $2 million, right? So did a bunch of different stuff across a bunch of different communities of practice. And that's one of the things that I really enjoyed most. That is going from, say, oil refining, mining, to something like aerospace manufacturing, or into wastewater, or into higher education, right? So I got a call from the University of Michigan out of the blue one day asking me to bid on one of their jobs. And I looked at it. I know government stuff, sometimes they're just looking for a third bid to try to fill out their folder. But I always ask two questions. One is, are you already working with somebody? And if they are they allowed to bid on this proposal, this RFP? And they came back, yeah, they're working with somebody, but no, they're not allowed to bid on this. Okay, then I'm interested. So that led to a pretty significant job there in a field, facilities maintenance. At first I was looking at the university. I'm like, toilets and light bulbs, I'm not super interested in that. But then when I started really looking into what are the assets of the University of Michigan, it's about an $8 or $9 billion with a B enterprise. They have nanotechnology. That was actually during the time when they had put the lights into the stadium.
That place is huge.
Yeah. Well, it was funny too, because one of the first night games they had, the lights went out in the middle of the night while they were playing. So I knew the guy that was the facilities maintenance manager I was working with was at the game. So I started texting him, "Hey, is that you guys or DTE?" "Oh, it's DTE, of course." Right. Yeah. But the point being that the university actually had all of these high tech systems and things like, you don't think about this, but when they're running an experiment on, say, a population of rats to do some sort of cancer research, well, that research might be a 20-year project. And if you have requirements to have the environmental conditions within the lab to be within a certain humidity and temperature range, can't go beyond that, when some other environmental conditions. Well, if you disturb that, you can lose 20 years of research and all the money. Plus, you think about if at the end of the day they could have come up with some sort of a cure for cancer or a mitigation for cancer. Now you're really talking about something significant, right? And so anyway, going across all these different communities of practice, one of the hallmarks of what I was always trying to do is what I call cross-pollination, right? So you go to a higher education conference for facilities maintenance, and they all talk about the same things, but they don't understand things that are talked about, say, in the oil and gas industry or in water, wastewater. And so the whole thing about being able to cross-pollinate, introduce different communities of practice to true best practices, not just best practice within their siloed community of practice, right? So that was one of the things that I always, really enjoyed doing. And so that was a big thing to me. And just my whole thing is I like to help people do better, right? And so every time I worked on something, a project, certainly there were some that I was disappointed with, because as you give them the solutions and you try to help them to get there, in some cases they just won't do it, whether it's egos, or because they don't have the resources to do it, or that the resources are not usually the problem, because you can always make incremental improvements, right? So it's a lot of times you fall into this thing where it's either an ego thing, or somebody doesn't want to take the risk, because if they step out and do something, they try to put in a work management process. Now their name is attached to it. And if it fails, their name is attached to it, right? But most of the projects I was involved with, I'm happy to say, were successful. Another thing I'm really proud of is that whenever I went into a facility and did work with somebody, the workforce always looks at some guy with a white hard hat and a clipboard from outside the organization. Their first thought is, oh, he's here to take jobs. And my premise was always that the majority of organizations have already cut to the bone. They didn't just cut fat, they cut muscle. And they're down to the bone. So the things that we can do to create efficiencies and to help them to find more labor, more workforce to be able to do a condition monitoring program, or to put somebody into a planner scheduler position, or a kidder, or whatever, from their organic workforce, being able to do efficiencies and to reshuffle the organization to be able to provide those resources internally without asking for more money. There's been very few people that got laid off. I can probably count on my two hands the number of people. And those people were folks that were just intransigent. If we're asking them to do planning and scheduling and to close out work orders properly, and they just refuse to do it. Well, somebody like that, you work with them, you coach them, you do what you need to do. But essentially, if they're not going to do the job, they need to be let go. But there's never been, in any of the projects I worked on, like mass layoffs or anything like that. I'm very proud of that, because I want people to earn a living. I want people to do good and feel good about their job.
Yeah, that's pretty wild stuff. I mean, and what a positive contribution to the organization, right? Like, not only, I mean, because the whole churn that comes along with hiring new people or releasing existing talent is very intensive on the backside. And I deal a lot with hiring management stuff these days, and it's just a lot goes into trying to develop talent and acquire talent, and to watch it walk away is terrible. So
yeah
that's really cool.
Well, and it's this we learned these things in the Coast Guard when we were going up through the ranks and being mentored by countless people that brought us along. That's the thing about being in the service, is that every year a third of the people that work for you, a third of your peers, and a third of the people you work for leave, and a new batch comes in, right? Sometimes it's you that leaves, right? And you go into an entire new organization. Every time that happens, you see a new set of personalities, and you see different leadership and followership. And it's such a great crucible to learn the rights and the wrongs. And what I would say too is that that's one of the big differences between the commercial world and the military. I remember very distinctly when I was a brand new third class petty officer at a search and rescue station in New Hampshire. And I grew up as a kid watching these old World War II movies where there was always some cigar chewing Marine Corps sergeant that was barking at people. So I thought that's what leadership was originally, right? And the first time I did that, I had a first class petty officer grab me by the back of the collar, walked me out behind the boathouse and said, "That's not how you do this." And then he proceeded to educate me on what's the right way to correct somebody,
Mm.
right? And I mean, it's that experience, that ability to see all these different styles and to know what works and doesn't work, and why. Not just that it works or doesn't work, but you get the full mentoring, right?
Hmm.
So by the time you're a senior petty officer, or in my case, I was a petty E6 when I went to officer candidate school. I came out as an ensign, but I was not your typical ensign, much
Yeah.
like you, right? I mean, people
Yeah.
made the mistake because they look at the collar devices and they see, like, these brass bars, and they make an assumption that you're, inexperienced or whatever. And you're like, stand by for heavy rolls, dude.
The day I reported to the Gallatin out of OCS, I'm standing on the pier and there's a seaman reporting to the ship standing next to me, and we're both in trops. It's super hot. It's like June in Charleston. And this kid's looking at me, and I sense him looking, and I look over and he looks away. And then I can feel him looking, and I look back and he looks away. And I said, "Hey, shipmate, is this your first day?" He's like, "Yes, sir." And I said, "Hey, do you have any questions? You curious about anything?" He goes, "Where did you get your tattoos and your ribbons from?" And I said, "What?" And he goes, "I didn't think ensigns had tattoos and ribbons." And I said, "Well," this kid's mind is trying to comprehend, like,
Yeah,
wait, I just went through 8 weeks of boot camp and I didn't think that these people existed.
yeah,
He was
yeah,
struggling. He was struggling to figure out where the hell I got all those ribbons from as an ensign.
yeah,
Uh, it's pretty funny.
yeah. So yeah, so I mean, that was kind of my journey after I left the service. But I was just always enthralled with it. When I was my last 6 or 8 years when I was in, I got heavily involved with RCM and condition monitoring and all those sorts of things, and it was just an intriguing field for me.
Yeah, you were such a good advocate of it. I mean, I remember even being on one of the ships, and they were trying to get the, vibration analysis program stood up with the NISU. And I remember the guys coming around putting pucks on our pumps and stuff. And, us MK types are standing around scratching our heads going, "What's that? Why are you putting that on my pump?"
Yeah,
And they're like, "Oh, you can stick this thing on here and it tells you what's going on." No way. It can tell me what's happening inside. They're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "We don't have to take it apart and look at it."
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's pretty
yeah,
wild.
and it's funny. And I had done some research on, other people that have tried to do condition monitoring in the past, right? So people that had come out of graduate school and they wanted to put in, systems that are reading turbulence and the ventilation system to see when it was time to clean them. And so one of the things we did was just took a simple pipe inspection camera and scoped the vents, and you see it's only really the first 10 or 12 feet that get any accumulation of dust. So we had MLC, our parent command, to rewrite the contracts to just clean the first, several feet of duct instead of all of them. And on those 6 cutters that were in Portsmouth, Virginia, we saved $500,000 in 2 years just by
Wow.
modifying those. And so we use that money to go back. Parent command kept most of that money, but whenever I asked for, hey, I want an ultrasound gun, oh yeah, here you go.
Wow.
Because
That's
you're
crazy.
able to show benefit, and I always ask, just give me 20% or 10% of the benefit, and let me reinvest that and do other things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And Mohammed just dropped a question on us. It's specifically to you, so I'll get out of the way so you can answer it. But yeah, he wants to know, what do you think is more beneficial for learning, online courses or work experiences? And I have my own opinion, but I'll wait.
Oh well, yeah, it's interesting. I say online courses are great if that's what you can do, right?
Mhm.
Work experience is nothing more beneficial than actual hands-on work experience. And there's
Absolutely.
actually, in my book, in chapter 2, I did a chapter on the human brain and why, why I did that was for two reasons. One, I want everybody to understand how learning happens. And so, as a consequence of that, I want leaders to know that they can learn and that the people that they lead can learn, right? And so when we put a policy, plan, processes, procedures, or measures in place, what it basically means is the way that our brains are structured, how we take in short-term memories, new instruction gives us short-term memories, but our behaviors are based on long-term memories. Other than pulling your hand away from, say, a hot stove or something like that, a reaction, right? Generally speaking, we need short-term memories that introduce us to something. Then we have to repeat those memories before they can be converted into a long-term memory. Behaviors, if we're learning how to do laser alignment, for instance, that long-term memory comes from one of four. The conversion of short-term to long-term comes from one of four different ways. The first is the most common and probably one of the top three and are the most effective. So that's spaced repetition. So if I do hands-on, especially if I have a coach that's teaching me, this is how you set up to do laser alignment, this is how you attach the gear, this is how you do this, that, and I'm the one actually putting my hands on it and doing it, that gives us two cases, right? So the first is spaced repetition, doing it often enough so that it becomes a habit, right? The second thing, second and third basically have to do with pattern hooks. Okay, so pattern hooks are engaging different parts of your brain at the same time while you're working on a task, right? So the two different ways that you do that are immersing yourself in a similar situation. So that you can think about that like computer-based training, like when you have simulators and you're using the same thought processes that you would use on the real system. And then the second pattern hook scenario is when you are engaging multiple senses. And I use the example of when you're learning how to drive, right? So when you have a parent or an instructor sitting next to you coaching you on how to drive, well, you have your hands on the steering wheel, your feet are operating the brake and the gas, and in my case, the clutch back in the day. You have vision, right? So you're looking at mirrors, you're seeing relative speed of objects outside the vehicle. You feel acceleration and deceleration in your back and your bottom side, right? All these different things. You're hearing commands. Maybe you're hearing a horn when you do something wrong, right? So you're engaging all of these different senses. So that's another pattern hook. So that's the first three. The fourth one is something you don't want to be doing in the workforce, and that's when there's some kind of a catastrophic event, like a car crash, or I was in a plant one time, watched a guy tumble off of a platform about 12 feet off the concrete floor. Not a pretty sight, but it reminded me, don't ever lean on a temporary railing, right? So for sure,
That'll teach you.
hands-on experience is the way to go when you can do that. And I also believe in-person workshops are better than online. However, online has the benefit of being able to rewatch it or to tune in, 2 months after you take the course, if the course allows you to tune back in 2 months later, you have that repetition to help drive that short-term to long-term memory.
Yeah, I'm with you, Tom. I think that there's something to be said about learning through experience. Sometimes, Mohammed, we have to learn some type of information before we can go really exercise the experience properly. That's why colleges and trade schools and things like that give us those basic skills before we enter the workforce, and then we learn where we can apply them. And that's really where the knowledge and the skills come together, and you execute, and it's kind of like, okay, now it all clicks, right? So I think any type of learning experience prior to execution is like introductory and knowledge capture, that kind of stuff, whether it be an
Right.
online course or a workshop or any of that kind of stuff. Really, it's just getting the information in your brain so that you can go out and do something with it. And some people, they enjoy the learning experience just for the sake of learning. It's fun for them. They like to explore new things, topics, and stuff. But when it
Sure.
comes to execution, there's just something about, it's kind of like, when we would teach us to do overhauls, right? You
Yeah.
could learn how to overhaul an engine. You could go through a whole week, a whole month's worth of C school, and you do it, even may even do it once there. And then when you go out in
Yeah.
the field, it's like, all right.
Where are the coffee cans and the masking tape, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like look at all the
To
interferences.
organize my parts, right?
Yeah, and all the interferences you have there that you don't have in a lab environment and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I did find interesting when I became an instructor at Yorktown was that some of the things I had been taught on the job, they were 70% there.
Yeah.
The person who had taught me something had given me a bad habit or forgot to tell me something. And I get to Yorktown and I'm like, oh, I was missing that piece. The
Yeah.
formal education piece comes with the rigidity of curriculum development. And yeah, so
Right.
sometimes, there's a benefit there as well.
Yeah. And so that's the other thing too, right? So I use the example sometimes too, like computer-based training, right? So you're going to get a new CMMS.
Mm.
And the way that the project timeline is laid out, well, we can't train everybody at once. So we're going to start training people in batches. And, we're going to go live on date X. And so we back it up to what we think we can handle on the training. Well, the first people to get trained are getting trained 3 or 4 months before the go live date. And we
Mm.
were expecting them to be able to manipulate the keys and do what they're supposed to do when they got trained once 3 months before the software went live, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy, and so that it doesn't give you the space repetition and it doesn't give you those pattern hooks to have happened often enough for them to lock in the memory. And
Hmm.
that's why those things fail all the time, right?
Right. Yeah. And James Anderson, by the way, was one of my EMs when I was active on my crew, and just a fantastic guy. Jim's an excellent electrician.
Happy Coast
And
Guard Day, James.
yeah, happy Coast Guard Day, man. And he is what an interesting personality and human being to sail with. Just fantastic talent, very focused. I just really appreciated sailing with guys like Jim. And Jim, I always appreciate you hopping in here and hanging out with us because yeah, I always thought, and I'm sure Tom experienced this as well when he was live. And Jim, I'm sure you're experiencing it now that you're a senior guy. You're worrying about sometimes whether those people that are coming behind you are picking up any of that stuff. You're the things you talk about in normal work with the Chiefs or the first class, and you can see the second and third class, they got their ear in the conversation, and you wonder how much of that trade knowledge is being passed down. Oh, you're out teaching now, huh? Look at this. Jim's not much of an EM these days, he says. Ah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Jim, I will say one thing, Mohammed, to your question. Yeah, Matt Coombs brings up a great point. Software can be its own enemy. Yes, it can be. Hey, you know what, Matt? I'm like going in two different directions all of a sudden, but I got to say this real quick. Nothing makes me smile bigger than when I hear someone that needs a program and methods and processes in place just by software and
Oh,
think that's going to give them all that stuff.
yeah. And so this is well, I'm going to back up for 1 second. Matt Coombs. I met Matt in 1979. He was an MK3 at Point Alverton Station, maybe 80. Yeah, I guess it was 1980. And I was going out there for my weekend reserve duty during my senior year of high school. So I've known Matt for longer than I care to admit, but I guess I just did. Um, yeah, yeah. So now on to the software, right? So I had this one project. I actually was talking to this guy, and I sketched out for him on a bar napkin, honest to God, what a good work management process is and how to integrate that with a CMMS. And he said, well, it's funny because they're having a CMMS put in right now. I said, do you mind if I come by and just kind of take a listen? I won't charge anything. I just want to come by, take a listen. And sure enough, the the vendor. And nothing wrong with any of this software, right? But it's the way a salesman gets reimbursed for, gets their commissions based on sales. So
That's
they
right.
want to sell this product, right? And so they'll tell the customer, yeah, just use our industry module for what you do and plug it in and everything's going to be great. And then they'll send an IT guy to sit in a conference room with 6 or 8 of your team and say, okay, here's the work codes. What do you want for work codes? And they all look at each other. Well, what were we using? Well, okay, that's what we use. So they just ports it in, boom. And what it just did was put a Volkswagen engine in a Corvette, right? You just gutted the system because you didn't design a work management process and then make the software mimic your process.
Right.
Right. And so the software company's happy, they get paid. The client's not happy because they're not getting the benefits that they were sold. And it's all because, they, you know, I was going to coin a phrase from Animal House, but hey, you messed up. You trusted me. And again, it's not that they're bad people. It's just they don't design work management processes. They have a template that marginally allows them to carry out work management functions, but it's not for your specific organization, your organizational chart, your how you do business, how often you do shutdowns, all those things, right? What kind of data do you want to pull out of that system? What's your culture? Are you able to put information into the system, right? So all those things. I ended up breaking into this guy's meeting and saying, "Hey, you need to send this guy home." And it's exactly what I told you was going to happen. He says, "You're wasting your money. So send this guy home. Call him back when you're ready for him." And that's exactly what they did. We put in a work management process there, called them back in, and they put the right codes, the right stuff in there, and then they were off and running.
Yeah, that's wild. I was actually I gave a presentation to the upkeep maintenance community last week, one of the webinars that they host weekly, and we went through maintenance task analysis with this group of attendees. And in the end, I said, "Hey, let me show you a form that I use, just a generic Excel form that I use to kind of organize the data that I gather from these things. You don't have to use Excel; you can use anything." And when we got done, this gentleman says, "That looks just like the user interface in Maximo." And I said, "Yeah, it does, doesn't it?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Anyone ever tell you how to use Maximo to maximize your program management? Like, you've got the software, it's got a good framework, but what do you do with it?" The maintenance task analysis isn't about just documenting the stuff in the system. It's about rolling that information over into support analysis. And getting a good maintenance procedure and having accountability for all your resources. And, but it's all that stuff around the thing that you're looking at daily on the computer screen. And that's where the pieces started to click, and Mohammed had asked earlier about online courses. I actually didn't intend to do a maintenance task analysis course until I spent some time talking to some maintenance planners, and they said, we've got all these Famicas, and then we kind of put these things together. So, there's an actual process you can follow to do that. And they were like, "Yeah, well, this is kind of the way we do it." I said, "You guys are almost there. Let me show you this thing." And you show them the S3000 L standard, and they're like, "Oh, that's cool. Never heard of the standard." And then you show them the ILS literature from the Department of Defense, and they're like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Yeah, see, there's just keep stacking the pieces.
The thinking's already been done. It's the application, right?
That's
you
right.
just have to be aware of it, and then you have to apply it.
Yeah, and that goes to Pops's point earlier. You get the information, whether you get it online or in person, and then you do a demonstration of it so that there's some learned application, and then the student goes and performs the task. And one day they're going to have to do it on their own or with someone else, and it'll be super beneficial for them. And look at here, we got Matt again. Lube oil analysis system. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you mean by old though, Matt? Because it might still be in existence. Are you talking about the JOAP program? If it is JOAP, just yes or no.
Well, NOAP and then JOAP. So,
yeah.
Yeah, it would tell you about 3 weeks after your generator blew up. It would tell you had certain bits of metal and your bearings were coming apart. So yeah.
That's it. Yeah, we would, yeah, exactly. I think we did a CPP one time, and it came back like a month and a half after we got back from patrol. It was like, "Hey, you have excessive salt content, sodium content in your sample." And I'm like, we ran for 6 weeks like that.
Yeah.
I didn't have a means of testing that on board the ship, so good times. So okay, so I've got to press you on something real quick though, right? Because I'd be a terrible host if I didn't do this, but one, I got to introduce people to where you're at. That's Alidade. Is that still the right place to find you, right? So this is
Yeah.
Tom, and this is the website, and
Yep. That's it.
yeah,
Uh,
and go ahead, sorry.
yeah. And if you go there, there's I mean, we were going to be talking leadership today. So there's a tab on there for productive leadership. And if you drop that down, you can, see about my book. Different places. There's 3 different links there for if you want to get it from Amazon or from Industrial Press directly or from me. I do signed copies of books, so there's a link to get to me that way. I've got a page on doing my workshops. I still, COVID be damned, I still want to go out to facilities or a venue near a facility if it's hard to do in your facility to be able to do in-person workshops. And that, this kind of ties into something we were talking about earlier. Uh, when I do a workshop, I do a 2-day productive leadership workshop, and I go through the human brain. I go through the organizational reliability model, which is a model that applies to each level of leadership, and it identifies who's accountable for categories of things at each level of leadership, and that's extremely important so that when there's a breakdown in the organization, you can identify where that breakdown is. And it's also modular so that if you're a maintenance manager or a work center supervisor, you can apply that model just to your work center or your group, right? It doesn't have to be the entire organization because, everything about the book I tried to make practical, right? So I realize that you might be stuck in an organization where the plant manager or the executive leadership team just won't move on things, but you can do better. So you can apply these models at your level. And ideally, you'll affect your peers and the people that you report to, and you can grow this model throughout the organization. But anyway, that organizational reliability model assigns accountability to different aspects. Okay. And then the second model is the productive leadership model, and that has to do with the individual leadership capabilities. Okay. And then at the end of that, I talk a bit about how do you put a productive leadership system in place. But that's kind of a trivial piece at the end. And ideally, when I sell this, what I say, there's a 2-day course, but I also want to sell them a half-a-day course where I talk to the people that are attending the 2-day course. Who do they report to? I want a half a day with those folks. Because what I want to do is sensitize them to these issues of spaced repetition or pattern hooks, forcing them to get the people that went through the training to actually use what they learned, right? Um, it does that, but it also sensitizes them to what I call the blob, right? So if you go off to training and you learn all these neat things, and then you go back into the work site and you're not allowed to apply them because your boss doesn't nothing has changed basically, right? You're still in that same organizational model that has fostered the problems that you're in, right?
Yeah,
And so that's the purpose of the organizational reliability model. So I'm trying to sensitize upper management as to what are the best practices for an organization and what are the best practices for individual leaders, and then have them hold people accountable to actually do that. Put placeholders in your calendar to actually go out and ask about. So how is your time management? Are you putting, we talked at your last evaluation about you're going to do 30% of your time is going to be on the floor coaching, is for a supervisor, for instance, as opposed to you were only doing 5 or 10% coaching before. Well, now you're using time management, so you should be able to carve out enough time to actually do your management administrative tasks, but spend more time coaching, a little bit more time on systems thinking, working on your processes and procedures, right? So are you actually doing that? So the senior person needs to hold the junior people accountable by actually asking the questions and actually observing it and seeing if they're doing it, right?
that's pretty cool. And you put the book out, what, last year, or was it 2019?
Well, I actually completed it in 2019, and it was actually available for sale at the end of 2019. But it was actually, if you look at the published date, it's 2020. And so last year just kind of blew up, right, with all the COVID stuff. And
Great
so
timing.
my plan was to be going out and doing a lot of workshops last year based on the book. And typically I hand out a set of slides that you can take notes on, but I also provide a copy of the book. So we do that, and that's why I love being in front of people, because I can see their body language. I can see if they're getting the concept or not. If they have questions, need me to go deeper on something, we can do that. I just love being in front of people. When you start seeing light bulbs come on, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it really is. And, I'm looking forward to seeing that in October, because you and Hank are presenting together at SMRP in a workshop, correct?
Yep, it's a one-day workshop, so it'll be kind of a truncated version. So if folks are going to be at the conference, it'd be great for you to sign up for it. Not sure how many are allowed to sign up for it, but um, by all means, I get really great reviews when we do this, and I've been doing that workshop now for probably 5 years at the SMRP conference. And it always gets really good reviews. Get a lot of referrals based on that. I don't know if folks know, but I also write a monthly column in Plant Services magazine. I've been doing
Yeah.
that for almost 13 years now.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah.
And you haven't run
And
out of
so
things to talk about yet.
well, and so this is why I bring this up. I tell every time I'm in front of folks, I say that when you do a monthly column for 13 years, sometimes the well starts running a little dry. So by all means, if any of your viewers, have an issue or some concept that you want me to address in the article, just shoot me an email, and happy to respond to it, or give me a call. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you can't get a hold of Tom, let me know and I'll send it over to him. But you can reach Tom. Tom, what is your email address that you want him to send it to, if you don't mind me asking?
Yep, it's pjmpe at alidade-mer.com.
TJM
Yep,
PE
yep,
at alidade
-mer.com.
mer.com. I'm going to put it in the chat here, just in case anyone on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter wants to access it. LinkedIn hasn't authorized any of these streaming platforms to communicate written content to LinkedIn yet, so I'm waiting for that update to happen in their software. But we'll post it in the LinkedIn feed as well when we're done. For
Great.
those who are on LinkedIn watching. Of course, if you're on LinkedIn and you're not following Tom, then
What's
please
wrong
do.
with you?
Yeah. What are you doing? You got
Yeah,
bad,
this
bad
is
ideas.
what the book looks like. If anybody's, if you're looking on Amazon or Industrial Press, it's full of, pretty good information. Lots of exercises and diagrams. So if you're bored by words, you can see some pictures, right?
So Tom, I think that people like you and I and others that are watching and have a lot of experience in industry or have worked in a place where leadership was taken seriously. I should put it that way, right? Like the
Yeah.
military, like leadership was taken seriously,
Yeah.
even when it was bad.
Yes. Yes. And
Even the bad
that's something we
leadership was
didn't
taken
talk about,
seriously.
right? There
Yeah.
are, I mean, it's a sampling of society when you go
Yep.
into service. Now there's some cutoffs, so we're getting kind of, I wouldn't say the cream of the crop, but we're getting people that we exclude certain folks with backgrounds that are not congruent to
Right.
service. But you get the country farm kid and the inner city kid that come into the service, and then you put them on a boat crew and expect them to get along together, right? And
Mm-hmm.
two completely different backgrounds, different ways of looking at things. And this is, again, why I came up with these models in the book, is that I thought about, how come how come you have these change management projects that go into place, and the common number thrown around is 70%. But if you really look into where that number comes from, that it's kind of pulled out of the air. There's no data behind it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it's probably closer to 80% of change management projects that 3 years later have probably not achieved what the intention was, right? So my question was always, I would go into a plant and I would say, okay, we're going to put in this work management process. And then you'd see a binder on the shelf from like 5, 7 years ago of some other consulting firm that was in there trying to do the same thing. And so you ask, well, why did that not stick? What makes you think this one will stick when that one didn't, right? And so, well, because it's me, right? I'm going to make it work, right?
Well, I mean, look
No,
at it. You gotta work.
no, but it's what I'm saying is, there has to be reasons for that. And so when you start peeling back the onion, why is it? And it's not just in maintenance and reliability. It's in operations. It's in finance. It's in whatever. Any place there's people involved with having to change what they're doing. Why does it fail? Right. And so I started dissecting that and coming up with reasons why it failed. Right. And the thing about, getting training and not doing it often enough to create a habit. Right. And so, like I always say, culture is what most people do most of the time. And what people do are behaviors. So if you want to get a change in behavior, then you have to define what the behavior is that you want. And then you have to do that conversion of short-term to long-term memory. And you have to repeat those behaviors often enough that it becomes a habit. And once enough people have the habit, that becomes the culture. That's how this works. It's not it's not complicated, but it's people just don't understand those processes. And, a lot of them bail halfway through.
Yeah. I'm very big about saying be intentional about things when we're doing program change management, when I'm consulting, whether it be Navy or anyone else. Don't just wait for this to kind of occur out of thin air. Be intentional. If this is really what we want, let's start driving a plan or a path or implementing a system, a framework, a methodology, like you were saying, that gets us where we want to be. And I think that's one of the benefits of your system is that it gives them something actionable. It's not just like I read a book and I learned some concepts and I feel either better or worse about my own leadership or that around me. I actually have like a model I can follow to implement some actual change. And I think that's the brilliance behind the productive leadership system. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, because it's not, and I say this too, right? So, and I love what your dad just said, Charlie, that he learned the most from the worst leaders, right? What not to do. So that's, working for my share of bad leaders. That's actually why I went to officer candidate school, because I worked for 3 bad supervisors in a row. And I said, I'm not doing 20 years behind these guys. So, it can be motivating, right? And I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought on something else I was going to mention, but
well, I was talking about the system being a great framework for implementing like action.
Yeah. So and it's like I said, the mentorship, the just the idea that you see all of these different leadership and followership styles, right? And so you understand when you push this button, what's going to happen, right? There's a lot of things like that you come across.
Yeah, and James dropped a good little quote on us. Excellence is a trained habit, but corporate culture of excellence helps us get the new hire there.
Or at least if that's what it says on the company's website, right?
There you go.
Well, and this is a thing too, right? I always ask when I'm getting ready to go into a place, I always go to Glassdoor and I look at, well, what are people saying about the place, right? And usually there's a mix, but the people who, and I always take it with a grain of salt because people always, can have an axe to grind and they're just trying to make the company look bad when in fact it could be that they were a bad employee, right? So with that understood, I tell people all the time, go to Glassdoor and see what's being said about you, right? And if the preponderance of it is negative, maybe that should tell you something. If you look at the comments and it says things like, upper management pushes us too hard, they don't listen to our ideas, and I mean that's free education, man. You could look at that stuff and just self evaluate and see where you're at, because maybe you do need help. Maybe you'd need somebody to come in with a model or something that would help you to put things in place to set the ship right.
Yeah, I was talking to someone within the last week about exit interviews, conducting exit interviews, and what to do with that. And it was telling organized organizations that don't do exit interviews. That's pretty interesting. I think it might have been Bob Latino, but I don't want to. If it wasn't Bob, then Bob, you're exempt from any liability here. If it was Bob, then all the credit to Bob. If it was someone else, I'm sorry. You can yell at me about it. But yeah, we were talking about exit interviews, and I almost started laughing out loud because not because I think exit interviews are great, right? Capturing that input from people on the way out the door is fantastic. The thing that made me laugh was I did an exit interview with one of the worst leaders I've ever worked for before. And it
Yeah.
was like one chance to really let them know where I thought things stood. And I was very professional, but I felt terrible for the guy after I left because it was literally just me giving him a list of things
Yeah.
that was not right. Like, dude, we got to fix this. Dude, you should look at this. Dude, this is a problem. Why aren't you, And I've
Yeah.
never done that before, but I took that opportunity because they didn't give the opportunity between the start date and the leaving to have
Yeah.
those conversations. And so, I feel like it's something that we have to iteratively do. We have to capture and communicate on frequent bases with people so we can make sure we're like measuring performance against that expected baseline.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is I kind of coming back to what I had forgotten, what slipped my mind earlier. The idea that leadership training, a lot of times, what I say is that, so you're a manager and you say, hey, my supervisors are kind of goofing up. We need some leadership training. So they go to the HR manager and the HR manager says, okay, I'll find some leadership training. So that HR manager goes out and what I say is they find the glossiest flyer, lowest cost index, right? Of whoever the local leadership training folks are.
Nice
And so they
ratio.
get a, yeah. And so they'll book a room, a conference room at the Holiday Inn Express, and they get a dozen of their, supervisors and young managers to go to this course. And they teach them time management, communication, giving and receiving feedback, delegation, and conflict management, or some, just a group of leadership skills.
Hmm.
But if you look at my productive leadership model, leadership skills are just one of about 8 things that a
Hmm.
leader needs to know, right? So time management is great, communication is great. All those things are important, but you also need to know, number one, as a leader, you want to be a leader. You should have a personal mission, vision, value, and objectives that align with your job as a leader and potentially what your next leadership job is, because you want to set yourself up by gaining experiences to put yourself in a position to be that. But in addition to leadership skills, you also need to know leadership attributes and leadership roles. Leadership attributes I call karma, right? Consistent, attentive, respectful, motivational, and assertive. Leadership roles are where you spend your time as a leader, when you're on the job. So the first is expert technician. If you're a supervisor or manager, you should do very little of that. But in certain cases, you may need to pitch in. You should spend time as a manager administrator, which is probably 40% of your time or more.
Hmm.
You should have another 30 or 40% in as a coach. Then systems thinking is working on your internal processes, procedures, policies, and so forth, trying to get better. And then visionary, that's looking at things that come from outside of your sphere of influence, right? So if you're a maintenance manager, you need to be looking out at the general economy, looking at
Hmm.
what's coming down the pike for operations. Is there a new technology we can deploy to make our maintenance better, right? Looking at things outside of your organization. So time management helps you to allocate time to those, right? Then you have to know something about power, right? So there's position power and personal power,
Oh
and
yeah.
position power is delegated to you by the nature of your job title, um, and personal power is how others allow you to influence them based on how you treat them, right, and what your expertise level is. The combination of personal and position power, you have to balance those. You both are necessary, Sometimes you need to use position power if you're trying to get people to do things that they wouldn't normally want to do, but has to be done. But most of the time, 80 or 90% of the time, we should be using personal power.
Yeah.
Getting people to do things because they trust your judgment. They view you as a trustworthy, good person, and they're doing it because you make sense in what you're asking them to do. Then outside of power, you should know some things about influencing people. So needs theories, Maslow, McClellan, Hertzberg. You should know what motivates people, and then know about building trust. What are the things that you can do to increase trust, and what things destroy trust, right? So and you should know some things about group dynamics, right? Dyads and triads, and why is the chain of command important? Why is it so important to not have any light between a manager and a supervisor, right? Why, those sorts of things. And then the last piece of the model is about how do you set goals, right? And the SMART acronym, right? So you have objectives, but we want interim goals on the way there. So again, both organizational reliability model and the productive leadership model are both things that you can learn as an individual and apply at your level or throughout an entire organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all that is pure gold. And I love the fact that you brought up trust, because I cannot tell you how many times I've had to sit in a room with senior leadership and say, we need to stop acting like this is salvageable. The
Yeah.
trust is gone. And
Right.
unless you are all going to tell me right now that you can reinstate that trust, you're delaying the inevitable.
Yep. That's
Without
exactly
the
right.
trust, there's nothing. We're just dragging this on. You have to reestablish that, or we have to cut loose now. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And it's kind of the hard truth. But without trust, there's almost no future between two human beings working in close
Right.
proximity over something critical. It's
Yeah.
pretty tough.
And I always think about, every time I got transferred into a new position, right? You get there and maybe somebody from a past tour someplace, some other unit that you're at, but most of the people there don't know you, right? So you get there and you're initially going to be relying on position power because you haven't built the relationships with people. But when you start using that position power, as long as you're using it correctly, that helps to build trust, right? You're not being authoritarian. You're just saying, hey, I'm the shop supervisor. This is what we're going to do. As you start getting feedback from people and feedback by observation, being attentive and watching how they work, you're getting feedback and you're interacting with them. You start developing personal power with them. So over time, that balance shifts from being primarily position power to being more and more and more until it's predominantly personal power, right? Inevitably, you're going to have somebody that challenges you and just doesn't want to do it. That's fine. We have ways to deal with that.
Yeah, we
And
call
that's
those
true.
green tablecloths.
Well, but what I say though is that's true whether you're in the service or in industry, right?
Yeah.
If you're in a private company, there are HR policies. And just like in the service, there are specific things that you have to follow in order to exert discipline, right? But it's there to do it. And what I say too is that when you correct somebody, when you're applying discipline, whether that's a letter of reprimand or unpaid time off or termination, whatever it might be, you're not doing that because you're trying to change that one individual. You're doing it because you're supporting everybody else that is following the rules. So a lot of people, the two hardest things for a new leader to do, number one is to correct people that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And the other thing is to get their hands off the tools, right? So getting your hands off the tools, that's why I say expert technician. You only do a little bit of that because somebody gave you the opportunity to show what you can do. It's your turn now to step back and let that other person show what they can do, right? So on the second thing about interacting and correcting poor behaviors, It's an uncomfortable thing, but you have to go into it with a plan. And in my book and in my training sessions, I talk about, the three-step process, and then for more serious things, the six-step process. And the idea here is that if you have in your mind how you're going to address the problem, your stress level goes down because you have a game plan. You know how you're going to deal with this person, and it's a lot less stressful than when you go in there and you're just going to confront this person. Well, you go in there armed with, why is this? This is what I observed. This is why it's a problem, and then you shut up and listen, because sometimes what the person did was for the right reasons, right? So you don't jump to conclusions, but you don't let it go away either. And for the more serious things, that's why HR policy exists. I did have one client where we put in a work management process, and we had a one guy that just wouldn't get on board, and the supervisors were going nuts. They're trying to get this guy to comply all this stuff. So I said, all you got to do is start documenting and follow your procedure. So they followed the procedure, gave them a verbal reprimand, gave them a written reprimand. Then they went to HR to try to give them unpaid time off. The HR director wouldn't do it. Said, just give them another letter. I said, whoa, time out. Your policy says this is the steps to follow, and you're not supporting your policy. So I grabbed the maintenance manager, went to this HR director, and I said, you either need to follow your policy, or you need to rewrite the policy and train everybody on the new policy. But you have to follow your policy. And so she, to her credit, she said, okay, we'll do what you ask. And as soon as we did that, all of the other people in that department, all of a sudden, they were like, I'd say 2/3 of them were happy. They were like unbelievable, because they had been complaining about this guy forever. And then, another third is, they were kind of like, yeah, that guy had it coming, but all the performance level went up because they saw that the organization now was serious and they're dealing with it. Right. And you only have to do that once or twice, every once in a while, to get everybody's attention. And you're not picking out a scapegoat and attacking them. You're letting that person's performance, their behaviors are what's driving it. Right. And you're just dealing with that behavior. And again, you're not dealing with it because you're dealing with a bad person. You're dealing with it because everybody else that is doing what they're doing. And that, in addition to having a game plan, should give you the confidence to go forward and to deal with that issue.
I love it. And I love that, for every person I've ever heard say, oh, I mean, you probably heard it, when you were getting into I'm going to start talking and teaching about leadership space. When I got out of the service, people were like, I was an org leadership major for 2 years before I jumped over to systems engineering. And that was at the recommendation of one Captain Suzanne Brown. And she said, this org leadership program is great. I said, cool, thanks. And then I thought there'd be a lot of utility in taking that out of the service. But a lot of people were like, oh, this is touchy-feely. This stuff is really not about leadership. It's about selling something that is intangible and all this stuff. And all I kept thinking was, wow, you need this more than anyone if you think that, because whose life hasn't been impacted by good or bad leadership? And you can feel it when it's bad. You could tell me
absolutely.
That's
Yeah. Well, and this is, I had a captain when I was at MLC. I started taking night courses for an MBA, and actually I started out in systems management. And as I was going through the course, people would say, well, what are you going to school for? Systems management. Oh, IT. No. About 80% of a systems management degree is an MBA, right? Yeah. About 80% of it. So I said, well, I'm gonna bite the bullet. I go take the GRE or whatever the exam was to qualify for MBA. Got the MBA instead, but my focus was organizational development. Yeah, I can read balance sheets. I know about economic analysis and all that stuff, but I did it because of organizational development. It was just, even the things I was doing for condition monitoring in the Coast Guard and trying to bring that forward, it was all organizational development, right? It was all I always look at leadership as, when you're trying to get people to do things, I always look at it like a pump, right? A pump doesn't create pressure.
No.
It doesn't create force, right?
Nope.
What it does is creates a low pressure area and the fluid flows into it. The dynamics of that fluid flowing in is what you can convert to pressure, right? And
Need
so
resistance.
I always viewed leadership as creating a low pressure area to make people flow into it,
Mm.
right? I
Yeah.
had one of the last things I had to deal with at MLC or at NISU, Naval Engineering Support Unit. We had a cutter there that we were doing a engine inspection, diesel engine inspection. We pulled off the lower end covers, and the guys were down there, and they noticed every one of uh, what do you call it, main bearing caps.
Mm.
The bolts holding in the main bearing caps were all messed up.
They were
Whoever
backwards.
put them in, no, whoever put them in didn't align the flat on the hex head bolt with the flat on the housing, the bearing housing.
That was my number one main.
There you go. So you
On
know
the
this,
day.
right? So
Yeah. Yep.
I won't use his last name, but Gary
Yep.
was at the NISU demanding that 2 weeks before the patrol, we
Yep.
pull out all of his main bearing bolts and replace them with new. And so we had him in the conference room, and we had a big crew in there. And so I'm saying, well, here's the deal. There's this guy named Soderbergh, and he came up with this cycles, right? So cycle
Mhm.
fatigue. I said,
Yeah.
those things from the last time that engine was put together, like 4 years ago, it reached 1 million cycles in like an hour of the first patrol. So Soderbergh says if you read 10 million cycles, it ain't gonna break, right? So by the end of the first patrol, you had 10 million cycles 4 years ago. And
Yeah.
so, no, we're not replacing them now because that would cause a delay in your mission. So get underway with them. And when you come back, we'll have new ones made up and we'll QA all the bolts, make sure you got the right quantity and quality and everything's good. And we'll have a plan and we'll put them all in. Right.
Yeah.
So, oh, it's
I
good to hear that
remember that.
you're on that end.
I love it because I remember that happening. It was yeah, for those that aren't familiar, on an Alco 251, the connecting rod bolts, when they drop through the upper and lowers, there's a flat on one side that faces the con rod. And if you have them rotated, they don't fully seat against the two back faces. Just the bolt side, or the bolt side doesn't seat, but the nut side does. And
Yep.
oh my gosh, you just thought the world was coming apart.
Yeah. So we got to a point and Gary would not change his mind. So I said,
Yeah.
okay, that's fine. You can go up your chain to the ops area, area operations. And I went through my side on the engineering side, and engineering one, get underway. We'll fix them when they get back. But that's, a classic reliability, you know,
Yeah.
wanting to make sure availability was there for the mission. And
Well,
yeah,
that's the magic word, right? And when both those chains are exercised, the one that's saying "I guarantee your availability," that's what the operational commander wants to hear.
yep. And that was some, low life 04, lieutenant commander saying it. It wasn't the captain or the admiral, right? But the captain and the admiral had faith in me, and they were both engineers too, and they knew all about Soderbergh. So,
Yeah,
we spoke the same language. So,
that's excellent. Well,
yeah.
I love the example, and Tom, I just can't thank you enough for coming on. I don't want to keep you from the tiki hut because I know you've got some 231 first birthday libations to consume with friends.
Yeah, sure do. Crusty old Warren bosun mate. So
That's right.
if I'm late, he's gonna have me.
Yeah, and I don't want to compromise your integrity with a bosun's mate because we have to
Yeah,
be better than them as MKs. But
that's right.
yeah, I do want to thank you for coming on, and we're gonna definitely have to. If you'd be willing to come back, I'd love to have you back, and we could peel apart a chapter of the book that you think would be really good to dive into, and really really talk about a little bit more about the productive leadership system, because I think it's fascinating for people in any industry, as you indicated. It's applicable across so many different fronts and so many different disciplines. And it doesn't matter if you're a manager, it doesn't matter if you're a worker, it doesn't matter what you are. This stuff means something to you. And we got a little bit of shipmate peer front bragging going on, and I got to give him his time here.
Yeah. No, I never worried about Charlie's boat. Always squared away.
No.
Him and Hank. Yeah, never a
See, with them,
problem.
it's easy with them because you just go, I'm sure all your Conrod bolts are in, right? I'm sure of it, right? Yeah, we're not gonna look. And then they go, yeah. And then they go, I gotta go look.
Yeah.
Just light the fire. Those two get so curious, you know.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, Tom, thank you so much. And if you could share with everyone how they can get a hold of you, where they can find you, where they can follow you, that'd be awesome.
Oh, sure. And I'm thinking, is there a way for you to put the contact information on the bottom of the posts? But the email is tjmpe@alidade.mer.com. Website is what you see there, alidade-mer.com. My cell number is 321-961-4306. You can reach me through LinkedIn. It's LinkedIn/AlidadeMER. Lucas can always get in touch with me. And I'm going to be at the SMRP conference, and there's a couple others I'm looking at. I'll be presenting there the leadership workshop, 1-day workshop, and I'm also doing another one. I'm going to space the name on it. Oh, I'm going to talk a bit about the leadership survey I just got done with Plant Services Magazine. And certainly, if anybody would like me to come by, I sometimes get invited to plants to go spend a day and just address the plant for the day and do some things like that at corporate events and whatnot. And again, if you have any need for productive leadership workshop, please give me a call. Contact me. Happy to do it.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom. And like we said before, if you guys aren't following Tom, please do and reach out to him if he can help you. For those that are watching the show and you haven't seen it before and you're interested in seeing it again, you can follow us on LinkedIn and you can follow us on YouTube. Don't worry about that crazy link there. Just search for East Partnership and you'll be fine. And don't forget to subscribe so that you can get more great content from folks like Tom. I'm going to drag all my friends onto the show or people that would openly admit partially to being a friend right until the money starts flying. And make sure that we can keep a great thing going. Jim, everyone else, happy Coast Guard Day.
Semper Paratus.
Yeah, thanks for everyone tuning in. And as always, the last thing I try to part with, if I can remember, is to tell people to be good human beings to each other because everybody needs that in their life right now. So thanks, Tom. And everyone, have a great week. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Thank you, Luke, and take care, everybody.
Yes, sir. Thank you.